Today's video is brought to you by campingsurvival.com. Please click the link below, and for all your camping and survival gear, please visit campingsurvival.com.
But let's be clear. Benghazi happened a long time ago.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator.
Benghazi happened a long time ago. Benghazi happened a long time ago.
So America wants to know the truth. The question is, how much of it do they want? Hey everyone, welcome back to AMTV News. I'm your high information anchor, Topher Morrison. It's Wednesday, May 8th, 2013, and it's all about Benghazi today. It's known as Benghazi Gate, and if you haven't been watching too much Jodi Arias, it's about the murder of one U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 3 other Americans after Libyan militants Ansar al-Sharia laid down mortar and gunfire on a U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya last year. However, rather than Benghazi Gate, taken from the infamous Nixon scandal of espionage and obstruction of justice, the attack in Benghazi is more appropriately an extension and blowback of the mentality displayed during the Iran-Contra scandal of 1986, when senior Reagan administration officials secretly facilitated the sale of arms to Iran, only to turn around with the proceeds and fund the Nicaraguan Contras, both actions of which were illegal. Iran-Contra briefly exposed to America the dark underbelly of its government's clandestine operations abroad, but it did very little to the Reagan administration at large responsible, aside from the resignation of Colonel Oliver North. We anticipate the Benghazi attacks of September the 11th, 2012 to garner similar change within the Obama administration, because as will soon become evident, scandals and cover-ups is a bipartisan tradition. Today on Capitol Hill, the number 2 American official in Libya at that time, Deputy Chief of Mission in Libya Gregory Hicks, who became the Chief of Mission after Ambassador Christopher Stevens was killed, gave his testimony along with 3 others, testimony much of which was already known. A 4th witness is barred from testimony due to red tape, and a 5th witness, of course, General David Petraeus, former director of the CIA with intimate details of the matter, resigned in a timely sex scandal.
Well, David Petraeus is a great American, an admired American. Now he has to resign from the CIA. Why, John? What is the meaning of this? What is the timing of this?
I am told by several sources it was not beauty killed the beast, Larry. It was Benghazi. Mr. Petraeus misled, I'm told, misled an important committee on the Hill, and he did not want to return to that committee as director of the Central Intelligence. Mr. Petraeus knew that there was something that could be played against him if he did not go along, I'm told. And therefore, Friday afternoon, he walks out, he cites an affair that everyone in Washington shrugs at. And that tells me, Larry, that Petraeus has gotten out of the line of fire, and his assistant, Mike Morrell, will now have to maintain the White House's narrative or comply with the committee's demands to get the facts.
Much of the witnesses' testimony today verified what many suspected and much of what we already knew, that the consulate was ill-prepared to endure an attack, that requests to expand security beforehand were denied, that the attack itself was not a protest as a result of a YouTube video. Rather, as President of Libya, Mohamed Marjarif, echoed, it was a pre-planned, premeditated terrorist event.
So fast forward, Mr. Hicks, to the Sunday talk shows and Ambassador Susan Rice. She blamed this attack on a video. In fact, she did it 5 different times. What was your reaction to that?
I was stunned. My jaw dropped. And I was embarrassed.
The hearing confirmed that requests for help during the assault were denied, even though both Libyan and U.S. responders were ready to deploy. In fact, the Pentagon, via U.S. Special Operations Command in Africa, forbade reinforcements from boarding the Libyan C-130 destined to aid the Americans fighting for their lives. and that the U.S. military was ultimately told to stand down.
But were any of these U.S. military personnel not permitted to travel on a rescue mission or relief mission to Benghazi?
They were not authorized to travel.
How did the personnel react to being told to stand down?
They were furious.
So for you conservatives out there and liberals reluctant to reprimand your commander-in-chief, those are the facts of life in Obama's Libya. Just not all of them. In 2007, West Point's Center for Combating Terrorism described Benghazi as a main headquarters for al-Qaeda, and when it came to insurgents fighting in then U.S.-occupied Iraq, Libya provided more al-Qaeda fighters responsible for killing U.S. soldiers and NATO soldiers than any other Middle Eastern country per capita. Eastern Libya, known historically as Cyrenaica, since Colonel Gaddafi took power in 1969, was in theological, tribal, and political conflict with Tripoli, the capital of Libya, for decades, ultimately embracing militant Islam. Gaddafi rightly recognized the eastern Libyan city as a major al-Qaeda hub threatening his power, and it is why Gaddafi planned to invade Benghazi in 2011. NATO's subsequent aerial bombardment, however, ordered by Barack Obama without U.S. congressional approval at the behest of the UN, benefited this bubbling cauldron of Islamic extremism at Gaddafi's expense, preventing him from cracking down on not only those in open rebellion, but al-Qaeda, Gaddafi's biggest enemy. It was not, as many would have it, a mere humanitarian mission to prevent the oppression of the democratic innocence that was allegedly the Arab Spring. This deep history, however, seemed to evaporate as Republicans like Senator John McCain, standing on the very steps of Benghazi, where days before a man was decapitated, proffered his preferred narrative and blessed the rebellion contrary to what was well known in intelligence, military, and even political circles, albeit unknown to the American public. According to McCain on April 22, 2011, in Benghazi, "I have met with these brave fighters, and they are not al-Qaeda. To the contrary, they are Libyan patriots who want to liberate their nation. We should help them do it." 6 months later, in November of 2011, the same year, after Gaddafi was dragged into the street and assassinated, John McCain would be proven dead wrong, as it was later officially admitted by Christopher Stevens himself in a diplomatic cable before his death. Quote, that Islamic extremism appears to be on the rise in eastern Libya, and that the al-Qaeda flag has been spotted several times flying over government buildings and training facilities in and around Benghazi. Bruce Riedel, former CIA officer and a leading expert on terrorism, moreover, told the Hindustan Times, and backed up by the CTC's report I mentioned earlier, that the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, LIFG, which formed the bulk of the Libyan rebellion, led by one Abdul Hakim Belhaj, was not merely allied with al-Qaeda, but became an official al-Qaeda franchise in 2007.
Abdul Hakim Belhaj, and he is an al-Qaeda asset. He was trained in Afghanistan. He was an al-Qaeda asset, part of a very hardcore Salafist Islamist Libyan group called the Islamist Libyan Group, exactly, translating from the French, in fact. And he was tracked by the CIA after 9/11. He was friends with Zarqawi. He was captured in Malaysia in 2003. He was tortured in Bangkok, where I lived at the time, in one of those extraordinary rendition CIA prisons in Bangkok. He was sent back to the Libyans. He made a deal with Saif al-Islam in 2009. He was released, and now he's the military commander of Tripoli.
LIFG wasn't the only terror group either.
You've got this emergency meeting in Benghazi less than a month before the attack. At that briefing, the people are told that there are 10 Islamist militias and al-Qaeda groups in Benghazi. The consulate cannot sustain a coordinated attack, and that they need extra help. And this information goes directly to the office of the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton.
Now, considering the official ignorance of what is amounting to be a material alliance, is it at all surprising that the al-Qaeda affiliate, the February 17th Martyrs Brigade, was hired to protect the U.S. consulate and staff, only to melt away during the September 11th attack, leaving Americans feeling, as they described, abandoned? Is it surprising at all? So why then was Christopher Stevens at an obscure, rented, and ill-protected villa in Benghazi rather than the capital of Tripoli? In the first place, what was the real mission in Benghazi? Was it to establish a long-term U.S. embassy like Hillary Clinton suggests?
But you have to ask the question, was there an effort, number one, to downplay the exposure of the size and the breadth of the CIA presence in eastern Libya? That, I think, is one of the great untold stories here. I believe that much of this will come back to weapons and the movement of weapons out of Libya to Turkey and then into Syria, and what the United States knew about the movement of those weapons and whether it did anything to stop the movement of those weapons. I have one piece of data that says Ambassador Stevens was in Benghazi on 9/11 to negotiate a weapons transfer to get these SA-7s out of the hands of extremists. The State Department dismissed that idea. But to me, it makes sense why he would put himself in such a volatile area on the 11th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks.
This explanation goes far to explain why the requests for security were denied, even after 10 separate al-Qaeda groups were identified effectively running the city of Benghazi, and why an al-Qaeda affiliate whose members wouldn't pass a basic background check was selected to guard a U.S. consulate. Ironically, the hospital Christopher Stevens would eventually die in was run by none other than, you guessed it, Ansar al-Sharia. The reason for the low security? The consulate wanted a low profile.
And he not only put himself in that position, but there was an attempt to try to keep his visit low-key so it would not be well known that he was in Benghazi, because likely there would have been more of a security presence there.
This also goes far to explain why the well-defended CIA annex, or safe house, ostensibly a secret location, only 1.2 miles away, was a known quantity to the terrorists and was also attacked. Now, for the 30,000-foot view. As Washington's blog succinctly notes, and I paraphrase, as mainstream media has widely confirmed, al-Qaeda terrorists from Libya have flooded Syria.
The Arab Spring has created a buoyant marketplace for soldiers of fortune. They move from one revolution to another, some motivated by personal gain, some by conviction, others by adventure. They fight for their own vision of freedom, and for now at least, it's the freedom to live by the gun. As romantic and spontaneous as it may appear, aiding the Syrian uprising with mercenaries may not be such a genuine move. Videos of women and children in Syria gunned down by snipers are abound on YouTube, while it's still unclear who is pulling the trigger.
That there are terrorist snipers who are shooting at civilians, men, women, and children, blind terrorism, random killing, simply for the purpose of destabilizing the country. They're from Libya, they're from Afghanistan or Pakistan. Foreign fighters have been brought in here by the CIA and the other Western services.
One man's terrorist could easily be another man's freedom fighter, but for the United States, it's now 2 in 1.
The New York Times reported that virtually all of the opposition fighters in Syria are al-Qaeda. The U.S. government has been funding, training, and arming Syrian opposition groups at every level since 2006. Wall Street Journal and other sources confirm the consulate was mainly used as a secret CIA operation and that the State Department provided official diplomatic cover. WorldNet Daily goes as far as to allege it wasn't a real consulate at all. The CIA, rather, was using it as a conduit through which to transfer the found and repurchased heavy weapons from the looted stockpiles of the former Gaddafi regime after the overthrow. Where again does Christopher Stevens fit in? Reuters reports he was the liaison between Belhaj, head of the since disbanded LIFG, and at the time acting head of the Tripoli Military Council. Belhaj met with Free Syrian Army leaders in Istanbul, Turkey, and pledged monies and arms on behalf of the Libyan government to the then growing insurgency against Bashar al-Assad, president of Syria. It was then reported later by the Times of London that a shipment weighing 400 tons was delivered by, according to Business Insider, quote, a Libyan from Benghazi and the head of an organization called the Libyan National Council for Relief and Support. This was presumably established by the new Libyan government. That means that Ambassador Stevens had only one person, Belhaj, between himself and the Benghazi man who brought heavy weapons to Syria. Additionally, the CIA has been reported by the New York Times to be steering weapons into the hands of select Syrian rebels. And Benghazi is likely to have been the source, and if so, the reason why most of the heavy weapons are now, according to the New York Times, found to be in the hands of Islamic jihadists. Reuters reports that the Syrian rebels have been using these heavy weapons, including tanks, rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and specifically SA-17 heat-seeking missiles, to take down Syrian helicopters and fighter jets. But as I noted last week, those weapons, like so many our government loses track of or sells throughout the world, was used for other means, namely almost downing 159 passengers aboard a Russian civilian flight over Syrian airspace. What about old General Petraeus? Could he have told us what Benghazi was really all about?
Petraeus is, in many respects, an American hero, certainly
Yes.
for his work in Iraq and, we'll say, Afghanistan, too. An American hero. Now, John, the FBI is investigating. I don't know precisely what. I only know what I'm reading about this in the New York Times and elsewhere. But the FBI is getting involved. Is that something to do with the timing also? Because that sort of thing will leak out over throughout official Washington?
Benghazi is not about Libya. Benghazi is about the policy of the Obama administration to involve the United States without clarity to the American people, not only in Libya, but throughout the whole of the Arab world, now in turmoil. Benghazi is about the NSC directing an operation that is perhaps shadowy, perhaps has a presidential finding, perhaps doesn't, that takes arms and men and puts them into Syria in the guise of the Free Syrian Army. This is a very large story, Larry, and it's right in front of us for the second term.
Boy, this thing's going to unravel like crazy. It's going to unravel.
What is the real cover-up? The real cover-up may in fact have been what weapons they altogether shipped. We don't know all of them. But even before that, what was there to ship in the first place? In other words, what weapons did Gaddafi have to loot and then ship other than what I have mentioned? What weapons? Remember Obama's red line in Syria? Carla Del Ponte, leading United Nations investigator, said over the weekend that there are strong, concrete suspicions, but not yet incontrovertible proof that it's the rebels, not President Bashar al-Assad's forces, who have used chemical weapons in Syria. We know that Assad has chemical weapons. We know the rebels have possibly secured these weapons from stores they attacked, known to have been storing such weapons. But these chemical weapons could have just as easily slipped into the back door of the CIA's little gun-running operation. And while Gaddafi's massive stores of mustard and sarin precursors were claimed by experts and the Libyan government to be secure after the fall of Gaddafi, Libya can hardly claim objectivity, as they are admittedly responsible as much as the CIA and its political enablers like John McCain and Barack Obama for exporting the Libyan revolution to Syria. Today's hearings are not about uncovering the truth about American clandestine operations gone awry. But in the face of a mountain of evidence, is it so complicated that there was an attack on the consulate? Imagine dozens of Al-Qaeda and Syrianic separatist groups watching Americans and a jihadi look for a new fight in a far-off land, effectively taking their guns away after they shed their blood overthrowing Gaddafi. Rather, Stevens and company likely caught the bad end of a botched gun deal. Plain and simple. No YouTube video, no random act of violence. Cause and effect, ladies and gentlemen. Today's hearings, instead, are about retail politics, not the truth. About making Obama look like he downplayed the threat of terrorism after purportedly killing Osama bin Laden, and about making him look weak on defense. A man who's inserted himself into more countries than Bush could count, and has potentially created more terrorists because of his indiscriminate drone campaign worldwide than Bush's enhanced interrogation ever could. And it will be a travesty that this is the closest the American public can get to understand the deep truths of our government, even after all of the history and painstaking coverage from mainstream and alternative outlets alike to bring you this novel narrative. The real truth the American public has been denied, and often denies itself for various reasons. It's unfortunate that America will undoubtedly settle for a resignation and a "we should have known better" apology to sate its appetite for truth rather than full disclosure. If you're interested in the latter, keep tuning in to us as we capture every corner of the alternative media. Watch AMTV News Monday through Friday. Follow me on Twitter at AMTV News and like us on Facebook at Greenwave TV. Find my source material on this story and more videos like these at amtvmedia.com and greenwave.com, both part of the AMTV network. This is AMTV News, the voice of independence.